que nos dice que somos como unos animales salvajes, somos perros para ellos, pero lo que ellos nos desconocen a nosotros, que nosotros somos un pueblo con idioma propio y conocimiento propio, lo que no conocen las demás, la otra cultura, es que no valorizan nuestra cultura. Por lo tanto, nosotros las mujeres indígenas tenemos el valor principal para decirle a ellos también, como nosotros nos unimos para proteger nuestro territorio, nuestra tierra, nuestros pájaros, nuestros árboles, nuestros ríos. Entonces nosotros somos como la madre tierra. Tautuma, 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 así que casabagia core.
In this vein, I endorse the inclusion of the indigenous issues among the priorities of the United Nations.
Cambia.
De tener acceso a la educación, acceso al trabajo, que tengan tierra, que sea equitativo, que ya no haya exclusión.
When the land is taken of us, it's our life, it's our blood.
We don't talk in terms of a definition of indigenous, we talk in terms of the concept of indigenous. We express ourselves collectively through our culture, through our spirituality. We identify as a group collectively, we pass on our traditional knowledge collectively. Aboriginal descent, if you identify as such and if you're recognised as such by the community, that for us that's good enough.
Have a common collective experience. We are all the descendants of tribes.
Because that's what we're dealing with, is the violations against our mother, the earth.
In indigenous society, there are 4 things that are sacred above all. And those are the land, the air, the water, and the sun.
Against these corporate powers and governmental powers that are targeting our communities with toxic dump sites, with uranium mines, with all kinds of different things that are really, really, really damaging our people's health and straight up, you know, committing genocide on our communities.
También tenemos pueblos en ahuyentamiento voluntario, otros le dicen que es pueblos no contactados. Y queremos que el gobierno, nuestros gobiernos y también nosotros como organización asegurarles su territorio a ellos. Entonces esperamos de que su autodeterminación de esos pueblos lo respetamos en lo máximo.
Preserve a land base for our future generations, like my children and my grandchildren and children to come after that. Oh yeah.
Just over 80 years ago, Chief Descani traveled from Canada to Geneva to tell the League of Nations about the right of his people to live on their own land, follow their own laws, and practice their own faiths. Chief Descahe was refused permission to speak and had to return home without accomplishing his mission. But his vision has inspired countless indigenous leaders since then to articulate and pursue the goals of their peoples.
I mentioned that my spiritual leaders long time ago know that someday people from foreign countries will come upon our land and put up what they call rupiki. That means house of glass, where all nations who have able to come into this body will be gathered here and supposed to correct, change, and stop wrong things. The land of the Mutisinum, that means first people, to bring about peace and justice and harmony. And you have been talking about human rights. But all these years, you have not opened a door to the original native people.
For far too long, the hopes and aspirations of indigenous peoples have been ignored. Their lands have been taken, their cultures denigrated or directly attacked, their languages and customs suppressed, their wisdom and traditional knowledge overlooked, and their sustainable ways of developing natural resources dismissed. Some have even faced the threat of extinction. Indigenous peoples continue to suffer from prejudice and ill will. In many cases, they are trapped in the middle of conflicts, conscripted into armed forces, faced with summary executions, and relocated from their lands. They are subject to extreme poverty, disease, environmental destruction, and sometimes permanent displacement.
500 años que no nos han permitido realmente vivir en estados democráticos, pluralistas, diversos. Pareciera ser que los derechos humanos de los pueblos indígenas no existen. Pareciera ser que nosotros estamos destinados a vivir en la semi-esclavitud, en las restricciones y en la no participación de las democracias de nuestros estados. En ese sentido, nosotros a veces vemos con preocupación cómo se nos quieren dar a los pueblos indígenas derechos humanos de segunda categoría, cuando los derechos humanos son inalienables, inherentes, y los estados deben protegerlos. Como los que nos deben proteger a nosotros son precisamente los que nos limitan, violan nuestros derechos humanos y no nos permiten realmente vivir en armonía dentro de nuestros estados.
The victims of human rights abuses have hardly any way to get their plight known at the international level because they are poor, they are isolated, they are socially excluded, discriminated against, marginalized. They live somewhere in the jungles or somewhere in the swamps or in the mountains and have no access to lawyers or even to NGOs, and certainly not to the system of justice and the government, much less to international organizations. Though in some countries we have, for example, the High Commissioner for Refugees is working, or UNICEF is working at the local level to help people and so forth. Yet very often the complaints and the plight and the problems of certain indigenous peoples never get across.
On a beaucoup de problèmes particuliers que certains autochtones dans le monde entier, parce que nous, on n'a pas l'accès à l'eau même. On n'a pas l'accès à la santé, on n'a pas l'accès à l'éducation.
Our girls not to be illiterate like us. We want them to be educated.
O bilíngue é mais melhor do que indo só do branco. Tem que ser bilíngue.
Today, there are some 370 million indigenous peoples living in more than 70 countries, sometimes as majorities, but more often as minorities.
I am indigenous to this turtle island. Our teachings tell us that the Creator placed us here as caretakers of the land, the animals, all living things, that we were placed here with a responsibility.
We believe that our communities have evolved in certain ecosystems. We live with the land, we work with the land, and we care for the land.
La flora y la fauna más rica que se encuentra en estos momentos en el planeta está en los territorios indígenas. Y eso porque hemos sido guardianes de esto toda una vida y queremos que esto siga sirviendo para la humanidad, pero sin destruirlo.
If you put a map of where the indigenous peoples are and where the biodiversity hotspots are, you will find out that there is a perfect match. And it is not an accident. They have taken care of their environment for centuries, and they will continue to do so as long as there is no external agent, whether it's a multinational or a state government, that tries to appropriate their territory.
La situación de nuestros pueblos es muy diferente desde el punto de vista educativo, quizás, de salud, pero hay un eje común entre nuestros pueblos que nos afecta negativamente. Vivimos dentro de un sistema económico mundial que muchas veces nuestros hermanos no están preparados para soportar los cambios económicos en el mundo.
Aqui, ó, nós moramos aqui. Pra cá, tudo derrubado, tudo derrubado. O único lugar só é aqui, ó.
Aqui é tudo plantação de soja, ó.
Só soja, até em outra cidade.
Nós não queremos desenvolvimento, nós queremos uma sustentabilidade que garanta pra gente a sobrevivência digna dentro das nossas terras.
Indigenous peoples want to be able to choose their mode of development. They want to be able to, if they wish, integrate partly to the mainstream development efforts or partly keep their own development systems, or simply completely pursue their own development without integrating. Lands and natural resources are not just economic means for indigenous peoples. They are means of them continuing as peoples, as cultures, as part of the cultural diversity and richness of our world. For instance, we estimate that out of the approximately 6,000 languages spoken in the world today, 4,000 are spoken by indigenous peoples. And if one looks at the map of the world, one sees that the linguistic diversity in our world coincides with the biodiversity of our world. So we have to think of what it means. Indigenous issues, indigenous peoples are of global interest. We are all together in this as humanity, because by protecting and being together with indigenous peoples, we are protecting the cultural human heritage and the biodiversity of our world.
More and more governments realize that included in the right of culture, they must pay attention to the land. I foresee that this is the problem that we will be facing, but it is also the key. If we can't solve this problem, we will have the conflicts going on.
The land is the blood, is our blood. We cannot live, nobody can accept live his blood like that, or his life like that, no.
One of the important things is to try to find a way to build confidence between the indigenous and the non-indigenous sectors in every multinational, multi-ethnic, or multilingual society. And one would be very important step on this in this regard, namely to create an efficient mechanism at home in which the indigenous peoples would be represented in terms of equality with the non-indigenous section of the society.
The main problem facing indigenous peoples within their homelands is the right to exist as peoples. As peoples, they would have that opportunity or the availability of time and land to define their future. I think that self-determination is the essence that explains this entire realm of existence of indigenous peoples to survive. Self-determination would be defining their right to define themselves culturally or economically, politically within wherever their homeland is. Currently, this has been denied by the colonizers. The colonizers are really defining ways to limit the rights of the possibilities of indigenous peoples. And so within the document of the United Nations declarations, the right to self-determination is really the crux of the whole document. And it's something that indigenous peoples are fighting for.
I encourage all relevant parts of the UN system to build partnerships and assist the Permanent Forum in implementing its mandate.
The Permanent Forum is this very special body. For the first time at the United Nations, we've had this type of body where indigenous experts sit at the same level, around the same table with governmental experts. 8 indigenous nominated, 8 government nominated, and they have to make recommendations and decisions based on their common wisdom. This is what the forum is about. It is at a very high level, but it brings together this dynamic, the indigenous dynamic and the governmental dynamic together. It has an amazing input from indigenous peoples themselves. It has the highest participation of all actors, governmental, non-governmental, at any of the sessions of a regular body of the United Nations. It is a catalytic nodal point, the Permanent Forum, that meets every year to catalyze action during the session, during the year, and much beyond.
I am mindful of the prominent role that indigenous peoples themselves play in this Permanent Forum, which puts them at the forefront in representing their own interests, articulating their concerns, and proposing solutions to resolve them.
The Permanent Forum is a subsidiary organ, and it's an advisory body to the Economic and Social Council. And the mandate of the Permanent Forum is in 6 areas, which is education, health, culture, human rights, environment, and social and economic development. So those 6 areas are the areas in which the Permanent Forum, as an advisory body of the United Nations, should advise ECOSOC how to deal with indigenous issues in these particular areas of concern.
Its work is to be done in 3 major ways. One is to give recommendations to the UN system. The second way is through raising awareness about indigenous issues and also promoting coordination and the mainstreaming of indigenous issues. And the third, by producing relevant material.
One of our chief messages is to ensure that indigenous peoples who were previously marginalised and often left out of things are included in everything that we do.
Yo creo que es una gran vergüenza para los gobiernos y para las Naciones Unidas que no incluyeron dentro de las metas del milenio a los pueblos indígenas. Los derechos, la identidad, la dignidad y la cultura de los pueblos indígenas. Pero es tiempo de superar. Yo creo que tenemos 10 años para quitarnos esa vergüenza.
Indigenous peoples are not captured in the statistics and therefore not addressed very often in public policies. This is a reality, so we have to face that.
When you talk about Millennium Development Goals, then of course you have to talk about free prior informed consent, because you cannot just take away, you know, the lands of indigenous peoples without their consent.
Our land! That's right.
Or bring in development projects there without their consent, because in the end it might mean destruction for their own communities, and that I think is the problem with the same problem when we talk about gender, you know, that when you bring in projects or when you come up with policies, then you have to be very sure that gender equality is also essential in these projects. And I think for financial institutions, who are the ones who are the main funders of development projects, these two principles, gender equality, gender balance, and free prior informed consent, should really be essential and central into all the policies that they adapt for the projects and their programs.
Free, prior, and informed consent. This is crucial, and the forum is really tackling these extremely difficult issues. They are huge issues. So these are challenges, but we are all together in this. That's the point I want to make, that you have indigenous peoples, governments, and the UN system working together, and the Permanent Forum is a facilitator of this effort.
The interagency group that works with the forum now is finding that it is helping us organize and coordinate our work better. We are finding, and the papers submitted to the forum this year by the different agencies show this very clearly, that there's a tremendous amount of attention to indigenous peoples going on out in the regions.
Вообще, что может дать, или как мы, члены постоянного форума, уже находясь в структуре ООН, можем сделать так, чтобы все то, что мы нарабатываем, да, не только мы, а все структуры ООН по коренным народам, вообще как это может дойти до тех общин, ради которых в принципе создался и постоянный форум, и многие другие форумы и организации. К сожалению, на сегодня я могу это сказать, да, что выработано очень много разных документов, талмудов, которые очень важны и нужны. Но если все-таки не будет на самом деле того, что эти талмуды будут как-то влиять реально на жизнь коренных народов, то нет смысла, или как сказал мой один хороший друг, они очень хороши, эти талмуды, потому что ими хорошо разжигать в печке огонь. И поэтому вот как раз очень важно, чтобы это вот было, чтобы мы могли нашу работу, чтобы она стала реальной для коренных народов. И один из механизмов, чтобы это было, мне кажется, очень важным, чтобы мы, принимая решения, добивались его исполнения.
Se intentó de que este foro fuera un espacio de solución de conflictos que también pudiera intervenir en aspectos de conflicto entre pueblos indígenas y estados, pero lamentablemente su mandato fue limitado. Sin embargo, creo que es muy importante fortalecerlo y que realmente los gobiernos, las organizaciones de cooperación, las agencias intergubernamentales y los mismos pueblos indígenas pues hagan uso de este foro donde se debaten diversos temas entre representantes de estados y representantes de pueblos indígenas. Creo que es fundamental seguir insistiendo de que debemos de hacer una evaluación del foro permanente y ver cuáles son las limitaciones que tiene para fortalecer su mandato más adelante.
Well, there are many ways for them to be engaged. The most important engagement, I think, is to participate in the debates of the Permanent Forum. but also other forms of engagement have to do with their NGO communities and contributions to the voluntary fund.
It's a source of great disappointment to all of us that, for example, the Permanent Forum is not better funded, that the Voluntary Fund for Indigenous Peoples doesn't have more resources, and that governments are not more serious about their rhetoric. I think governments have gotten better in talking about the rights of Indigenous peoples. Now we just have to back up the talk with actual deeds.
I think we're all aware of the difficulties that Indigenous peoples face, especially with regard to economic financing to attend these type of meetings, the funding that it takes to arrive to a place like New York from a distant location. And I mean, there's all kinds of stories that we've heard about people even paddling before they, on a canoe, before they have to get to an area where they can get a plane to get out of their area to get to another plane to finally to make it here. I mean, there's continuous stories, and I think initiatives like the Voluntary Fund have been very important, especially in this new initiative, in this new forum, because we've already seen that access, that opportunity to arrive and participate and not having to worry about looking for funds through NGO, and it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be just all that NGOs are helping these people get there. It should also be the responsibility of governments to educate it and have that capacity building for the civil society. And we need governments to really look at that as a special initiative, as an important initiative, because just with these one individual coming and getting this kind of information and taking it back to their communities, we're already starting the process of education for the next group or for the next generation that's going to be participating in this.
Americano, índio já royam papulum, foi uriam, foi hambu pulu. Pata puluma,
I encourage all relevant parts of the UN system to assist the Permanent Forum in implementing its mandate. Indigenous peoples continue to suffer disproportionately. As part of our global effort to overcome these problems, we must develop schemes that specifically target indigenous peoples. The UN will play its part in helping member states to try to transform those MDGs into indigenous realities.
Como hacen en mi pueblo, voy a cantarle una cancioncita de despedida. Adiós, pueblito, pueblo de esta orilla. Adiós, pueblito, pueblo de esta orilla. Wasiki pongo manta, repukuchka niñam. Kanchay que poncha manta, repukuchka niñam. Ripollata, repukuchka saksi. Chinkayata, chinkayachka saksi. Bueno, cosa niña, que adiós.
Que nos dice que somos como unos animales salvajes, somos perros para ellos, pero lo que ellos nos desconocen a nosotros, que nosotros somos un pueblo con idioma propio y conocimiento propio, lo que no conocen las demás, la otra cultura, es que no valoriza nuestra cultura. Por lo tanto, nosotros las mujeres indígenas tenemos el valor principal para decirle a ellos también como nosotros nos unimos para proteger nuestro territorio, nuestra tierra, nuestros pájaros, nuestros árboles, nuestros ríos. Entonces nosotros somos como la madre tierra. Tautuma, 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 así que Casabajia Core.
In this vein, I endorse the inclusion of the indigenous issues among the priorities of the United Nations.
And the sun.
These corporate powers and governmental powers that are targeting our communities with toxic dump sites, with uranium mines, with all kinds of different things that are really, really, really damaging our people's health and straight up, you know, committing genocide on our communities.
También tenemos pueblos en ahuyentamiento voluntario, otros le dicen que es pueblos no contactados. Y queremos que el gobierno, nuestros gobiernos y también nosotros como organización asegurarles su territorio a ellos. Entonces esperamos de que su autodeterminación de esos pueblos lo respetamos en lo máximo.
To preserve a land base for our future generations and my children and my grandchildren and children to come after that. Oh, yeah.
Just over 80 years ago, Chief Descani traveled from Canada to Geneva to tell the League of Nations about the right of his people to live on their own land, follow their own laws, and practice their own faiths. Chief Deskehe was refused permission to speak and had to return home without accomplishing his mission. But his vision has inspired countless indigenous leaders since then to articulate and pursue the goals of their peoples.
I mentioned that my spiritual leaders long time ago know that someday people from foreign country will come upon our land and put up what they call Rupiki, that means house of glass, where all nations who have able to come into this body will be gathered here and supposed to correct, change, and stop wrong things. The land.
Come here. Bây giờ đó không
tener acceso a la educación, acceso al trabajo, que tengan tierra, que sea equitativo, que no haya exclusión.
When the land is taken of us, it's our life, it's our blood.
We don't talk in terms of a definition of Indigenous, we talk in terms of the concept of Indigenous. We express ourselves collectively through our culture, through our spirituality. We identify as a group collectively. We pass on our traditional knowledge collectively. If you're of Aboriginal descent, if you identify as such and if you're recognised as such by the community, that for us that's good enough.
We have a common collective experience. We are all the descendants of tribes.
Because that's what we're dealing with, is the violations against our mother, the earth.
In indigenous society, there are 4 things that are sacred above all, and those are the land, the air, the water,